Our next author, Nino Ricci, is the author of the Lives of the Saints trilogy and The Origin of Species. Tonight he will read from his Trillium Prize-winning book, Testament. Please welcome Nino Ricci.
Thank you. I was lucky enough to share my Trillium with Austin Clark for the Polished Hoe. And in our year, this was during the Harris years. I don't know how many of you remember them. I fully expected to take home half the prize. But the Minister for Culture at the time was David Sabushi, who I think fancied himself a writer, and in fact has written a number of books. And after reading a few of his own poems, he announced that he had decided to give each of us a check for the full amount. So I've always been grateful to the Harris years for that event alone. It was thanks to that check that my wife and I were finally able to renovate our kitchen. Mind you, we had to make it an economy IKEA kitchen. It was about 10 years ago, and that's about the lifespan of an IKEA kitchen. So I could use another win anytime soon. I'm going to read from Testament. It's a retelling, a reimagining of the life of Jesus. It's the only book that nobody ever asked me if it's autobiographical. I'm not sure why. And it's told in 4 voices. The third voice is in the voice of Miriam, his mother. So I used the Hebrew names through most of the book. And I'm going to start at the beginning of her section. As a child, I lived in Jerusalem, this in the time of Herod, who was called the Great. Through many favors, my father had gained a place at court as a clerk, and he began to think how he might further advance his family's fortunes by making a good marriage for me. Even in those days, there were many Romans who passed through the court, soldiers and officials who came down from Syria or Caesarea, which Herod had built, or even from Rome. One of these, a legate awaiting orders, my father befriended and presented me to, leaving us several times alone. In the end, because I was young and did not know better, and because he threatened me with harm, I was forced to yield to him. I was never able to forget the smell of him. He did not smell like a Jew, but had a perfumed odor underlain with a stench like rancid fat. After that time, I was able to bear many things because I knew always that the worst thing was behind me. The legate did not take me as his wife, as my father had planned, but abandoned me the moment he had received his commission. When he had gone and it grew clear that I was with child and so was disgraced, my father beat me when he discovered this, though as I said to him, "It was you who put me in his way," which silenced him. To save me then from being outcast, he began to search for a husband for me, asking among the lower orders, for surely no one of our own station would have had me. As it happened, there was a mason employed at the temple works by the name of Jehoshaphat who was in search of a wife. He was an old man, 3 times my years, who had put another wife away from him for barrenness and did not want to repeat his error. So it was an advantage to him that I was with child, because I had proved myself fertile, and also that I was young, being not yet 15 years. Nonetheless, to make up for the dishonor of me and the expense of being saddled with a child not his own, he asked much above the usual dowry, all in coin, and offered no bride price. It cost my father all his small fortune to satisfy him, in which, however, I took some bitter consolation, for he had ruined my life in the hope of advancing his own ambitions. We were married quickly in Bethlehem, which was Jehoshaphat's town. Of my family, only my father and mother were present, and my brothers and sisters, who were young and did not understand why matters had been done in such haste and with such unhappiness. They thought that surely Jehoshaphat must be the groom's father when they saw him, so ancient did he look. And I confess how my own heart fell at the sight of him, for I had not so much as laid eyes on him until then. It was the hardness of him that I could not bear. He seemed made of the same stone that he worked in. I was in the full flower of youth then, and had had my hopes, only to be coupled to such hard, unyielding flesh. However, that first night he came to me and said that because he judged me unclean, he would not lie with me or put any hand on me until I had brought forth my child, for which I was grateful. We shared a house with his brothers. Though Jehoshaph was the eldest, he was the only one without sons, and so had taken for himself the poorest quarters, which were no more than a cavern cut out of a rock face that rose up at the back of the courtyard. In Jerusalem, living near the palace, we had thought ourselves poor because of the many riches that surrounded us and that we had no part of. But the floors had been tiled at least, and the walls plastered and adorned, while here there was nothing between us and the earth, and we lived no better than the animals in the stable. Until I had given birth, I was not allowed so much as to step out from the house's gate to keep hidden the untimeliness of my condition. So day and night was spent in the gloomy damp of our cave, without company, since the wives of Jehoshaph's brothers would hardly deign to address me, and also kept their children from me. Jehoshaph neither encouraged them in this nor reprimanded them, and so behaved, as he no doubt imagined, with fairness. It was exactly this fairness in him that most embittered me. For instance, he said to me that until I had produced an heir for him, he would use no part of my dowry except to pay whatever expenses we incurred for the child I produced, so that the dowry would remain intact should he need to return me to my family. Thus he made clear to me that I was no more than a slave he had hired to make his heirs, and that he was ready to put me away from him as he had his first wife, should I fail him in this. Never once did he ask after the father of the child I carried. But I imagine this was not to spare me embarrassment, but only to keep me from plying him in any way for forgiveness. In any event, I saw him but a few moments in a day at the time, since in the mornings he left an hour before dawn to make his way to the temple works, and in the evenings did not return until well after dark. As I was not allowed to prepare any food but my own, he took his evening meal with his brothers, and so by the time he came back to me in our hovel, he was ready for sleep. Once, I remember, he brought a fig for me that he had purchased somewhere on the road, and for a moment then my heart softened to him, and I asked him how his work had been and how the temple progressed. But mostly I kept myself hard to him out of pride. He thought himself my savior, I imagined, but was only ignorant and ungenerous and dull-minded. It didn't occur to me in those days that he might fear me. I was a child, after all. What power could I have over him? Not the power of the flesh, surely, for he had held true to his word to lay no hand on me, and not once, even in accident, had his skin touched mine. Even the fig he had brought, he set between us for me to collect, lest our fingers brush against each other's. It was the sort of man that he was, or seemed to me then, scrupulous like someone who had room in his thoughts for only a single notion. When at last the child was born, Jehoshaph came to me and said we must leave the town, for the truth was becoming known and his brothers stood in peril of dishonor. In my pride, I said, it must be circumcised like any Jew, for it was a male, though I did not know if the law allowed this. But Jehoshaph said it was my own concern, and so I made arrangements in Jerusalem, naming Jehoshaph as the father. When the thing was done, Jehoshaph told me again that we must go. But I insisted we wait until the 33rd day, so that I might make my sacrifices. This time Jehoshaph said, the child is a bastard and can never enter the assembly. But this only hardened me, and seeing my stubbornness, Jehoshaph gave way. So it was that after the 33rd day he led me to the temple, and again my pride would not suffer me to purchase only pigeons or doves, but I must have a lamb for the burnt offering, which I paid for my dowry. I did not know why I insisted on these things, or why Jehoshaph allowed them, for we both knew they were for nothing. Jehoshaph, perhaps, was happy enough to let the world think the child was his own, and so save himself from scandal. Yet I knew that was not his way, that he did not court such open deceit, and thus that in some respect he indulged me. Perhaps it was the actual child that moved him, for it was beautiful and gentle, though again, as I later thought on the matter, it seemed there must have been some small part of fear in him, that he did not know what this child was, or where it had come from. Thank you.